Hello and welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. This will be a special edition. Luke Wyatt usually joins us on the Roundtable edition. Luke taking the day off this week. Instead, we are joined by Paul Grindstaff, the head of Anchor Impact. We're going to spend some time with Paul today. We're going to unpack a lot of questions that we've got and questions from the mailbag. Before we get there, reminder, we are part of the 440 Sports Network. And we are here because of our sponsors. The first one is the Wash House, which sponsors basketball season. If you are dreading laundry day, if it is stealing time from the things that you truly enjoy, let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of laundry for you with two convenient locations in the greater Nashville area. Just drop off your dirty laundry. Their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of. That is your time. Within 24 hours, pick up your nicely folded, fresh, clean laundry ready to be put away. Check washhouseclean.com. Stop in today. Get your time back. Baseball season is presented by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, a family-owned third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located in Murfreesboro. A partnership began over 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide Purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee. They now serve southern Georgia, northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. Today they supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with Purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. For more information, visit their website at mpmci.com. With that, we welcome Paul Grindstaff to the show. We were just talking pre-show a little bit. Paul has moved. He splits time in a few places, but mostly here in Nashville these days. Paul, thank you for joining us on short notice. Looking forward to talking to you today.
Morning, gentlemen. Great to be here.
All right, let's start with the first one from me. Just give us the background of your involvement with Anchor Impact and how you got involved.
Sure thing. I think the easiest way to that is to tell folks where I was last year with regard to NIL and collectives, and that was at New Mexico State. I founded that collective, working with it since the beginning of NIL, and of course, 17 wins over 2 years, 2 bowls, a conference championship, 10-win season last year. That was on the football side, but we had participation across all sports, including volleyball. Had a freshman All-American with softball, so kind of all in there, and of course, had a working relationship with the 4 coaches, in particular Coach Kill out there, and then kind of the slow migration, slow dance of, I think I'm number 10 that came from Las Cruces out to Nashville.
Well, how did you get involved with Jerry Kill and those guys? I mean, I know that obviously that's your connection, but you do a lot of things. You have a lot of businesses. Just give us the backstory on that.
Sure. Well, and I think we got to rewind that a little bit to my other alma mater, and that's SMU. Dallas was kind of my home base. I've still got a business in Las Cruces, some other places, had that 15, 16 years, and once upon a time I was the volunteer president of the Mustang Club board of directors. That's a fundraising arm at SMU, and we'd raise money and there's always money to be raised and work to be done. And then I always tell people maybe one of the biggest catalysts of SMU success was TCU hiring away their head coach, because when that happened, that catalyzed the fan base and led to the formation of a collective called Pony Sports DTX, and that was led by an attorney alum there in Dallas. And later on, there was a board of directors. It was him and 4 others of us, including myself. Then fast forward, NIL really got going out in Las Cruces and across the landscape. Did a few deals with the basketball team out there. That first year, we had 3 deals with my business, and that team wound up. I know that team out there is still the last team to have beaten UConn in the NCAA tournament. That head coach now is in the SEC. Around that time, at a basketball game, Coach Kill and I got to meet. Talked about NIL and what to do in the first season. I think we had 9 guys under contract. Second season, we had north of, I think, the mid-20s. But as he'll tell you, it was roll up your sleeves, sit in the corner of a sports bar, and there's still, I believe there's still a handwritten note in the corner. called Kill's Corner, and he and I would be dialing and smiling, and the later in the night it went, the more money we raised, and the more fun that we had. And that's kind of how it went.
Paul, appreciate you taking the time. You mentioned the 9 previous New Mexico State, so players, coaches, whatever, to come to Vanderbilt. Beyond that, what drew you to Vanderbilt? Obviously, off air we talked a little bit about Nashville, but what are some of the other things that drew you to Vanderbilt and to this venture?
Well, first of all, Vanderbilt has a lot of similarities to my other alma mater, SMU, and serendipitously, I guess you could say, the founder of Anchor Impact, Bob Carlton, who has a son who's a senior on the basketball team here at Vanderbilt. He's an SMU guy. And, over the course of the summer, I came out and visited, got to meet Clark, got to meet Candace, got to meet a lot of the administration, some of the other coaches and the players. And it was I wouldn't call it getting to know you, but an increase in affinity. And you know how it goes. The more communication interaction you have, the more affinity that there is. And so we'd share best practices and things like that. And typically the way things go when people enjoy working together, nature kind of takes its course, and that's where it heads up. And then I want to say about August or so, we were visiting even more, and conversation happens that would you be interested in helping out across all sports? And then we formalized it, and fast forward, and here we are.
Paul, what would you say the main goals are at this point? Obviously approaching January, the new year, but even toward the end of this season, whether it's football, basketball, or baseball, what are your goals for not only those sports, but also in any of the other sports where players can profit off their name, image, and likeness?
Sure. Well, some of the things when I surveyed the landscape when I got here, I was surprised to see that there aren't a whole lot of corporate or business partners. So one of our goals is to really activate that. Number 2 is to increase the membership base. And ultimately, when we talk about those kinds of things, partnerships, activations, players using their name, image, and likeness, what it boils down to is increasing our war chest, increasing our visibility, increasing our presence. Because at the end of the day, and I always say that above or below the Vanderbilt, I'd like to put a sign just as a reminder. It's also the title of a book that was made into a 30 for 30. And that sign would say a payroll to meet, because that's what we've got. We've got a payroll to meet, and the higher that payroll is that we've got to meet, the better we're doing. So that's if we want a measuring stick, that's where we are. You mentioned baseball. We've got 48 guys under contract on baseball. We decided to go all in because we should, because that's the caliber of program we have. And in order to do that, we need to make sure we identify, cultivate, steward, nurture, and build relationships and revenue streams.
You said 48 guys under contract with baseball. I think there's 45 on the roster today. So is that including some high school kids, or how does this work?
I should say everybody. So at one point in time, maybe 48, maybe 45, maybe going to be 48, but you can translate that into everyone.
Sure. Okay. Billy, if you've got another one, go ahead. Otherwise, we've got probably 8 or 9 really good ones from the mailbag from listeners.
Yeah, one more one I was really interested to ask you, Paul. You being at SMU, but also at New Mexico State, and having relationships and experiences at those 2 universities. How do you feel Vanderbilt fits in today's NIL landscape? Because 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know that we ever thought this is how college sports would look, but it is. And so how do you feel Vanderbilt fits? And, what's the ceiling, or is there a ceiling in your mind?
Well, I should condition my response by saying I came in at a great time, right? And I've heard the stories leading up to where we are right now is outstanding. From above down, from top down, inside out, across the athletic department, we've got buy-in, great leadership from the director of athletics to the chief of staff, who's the person I interact the most with, to our fundraisers across the board. We're in lockstep, up and down, left to right, and I think that's the way it's got to be. That's sort of how it was at New Mexico State, but look, probably the biggest advantage we had with New Mexico State football-wise was we were the first ones. When you look at their 2 rivals, they're up and down I-25. Up north is New Mexico, down south is UTEP. New Mexico State was the first of the three to have football NIL at a substantial rate, and it showed, right? But as always is the case, the industry evolves, and they both caught up, and that's something you always got to keep going. In the SEC, it's kind of the other way around, right? You had the obvious front runners out front first, and so I'm sure there was a learning curve. But where we are right now is good. And when I mentioned that, when I got here, I was surprised at the lack of not the lack, the number of business partnerships given where we are. Because look, I'll give you an example. Going back to Las Cruces, I used to tell this story. This is part of my stump speech. I'd tell a tale of two cities, right? One city's got a population of 115,000. The other one's got a population of 26,000. One city's got a university with an NIL program and 150 members. The other one's got an NIL program with 5,000 members. One of those cities is Las Cruces, 115,000 people. The other one's Oxford, Mississippi, 26,000 people. That's an interesting comparison. I can tell you can name any of those cities or any other city. And thing is, we're in Nashville. Nashville isn't Oxford, it isn't Starkville, it isn't any other place that ends with Ville. So we've got a built-in advantage that we really need to leverage. And I think the on-field product with football, that's huge, and what do they say? Everyone loves a winner and a beginner. And after you're not a beginner, if you're not a winner, then that's going to kind of lag. Well, I guess you could say I'm a beginner. We're all beginners in NIL, but right now we've got a winner, football, and we see what Coach Byington's doing with basketball. We see what Shea's doing in women's basketball. Baseball speaks for itself. So we've got winners that we need to sustain and prop up, and that's what we intend to do.
Yeah, two follow-ups before we get to the mailbag, or one follow-up and then one that I wanted to ask anyway. You mentioned Oxford. Obviously, that's the Grove Collective. That's Walker Jones's thing. I think he's done a tremendous job just looking from the outside in. Any lessons that you learned from maybe what he's done or somebody else that has been super successful in this space?
Sure. I would say there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. You mentioned Walker. Walker goes way back with the athletic director at New Mexico State. And a good friend of mine, Chris Jans, he's the head basketball coach at Mississippi State. So I got a chance to visit with Charlie Winfield. I consider him a friend. He's got a great baseball podcast. And in the beginning, when he started the Bulldog Initiative down there, his staff consisted of him and his daughter. So again, there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. And it's we talk and we visit, and something that's interesting and fun, and I would share is Charlie mentioned to me that name, image, and likeness, the NIL, with SMU they say it stands for now it's legal. Charlie kind of evolved that, and he said it stood for not into losing. I appropriated that, and I think there was another podcast out in Albuquerque with the University of New Mexico guy, and he borrowed that from me, and I borrowed that saying from Charlie. And so it kind of goes full circle. So we're all in the same industry, we're all kindred spirits, and we all have the same challenges, problems, likes, and dislikes.
Next one before we get the mailbag. I know revenue share is coming at some point, could be next year, could be further in the past. The people I talk to don't think NIL is going away even after revenue share. How does that impact what you're doing at Vanderbilt when revenue share comes?
So the easiest way to look at that, I think, is this. There'll be an escalator going along, and there will be revenue to share, like you mentioned. There's a number. A few things about that. Number one, we look at there's some aspirational peers of us who have a football payroll of 18 million or more. If that revenue share is 22 million, I'd be really surprised if they spread 4 million across the rest of their sports. Yeah. The other thing is the 22 million presupposes you have 22 million to share. Well, what if that 22 is already accounted for? Well, the thing is we need to continue to drive revenue. So I think from the collective point of view, there's all kinds of services and needs for that. One of my favorite things to work with are what I call the non-revenues, what everyone calls the non-revenue sports. You can move the needle with 50,000 on a non-revenue sport, a lot more than you can with 50,000, say, in football. And so there will be a need for those. But again, driving revenue and identifying opportunities to continue to expand that is really important. And with in the NIL landscape, it's always been changing. In the beginning, the NCAA said, well, we don't really have any rules, just kind of defer to your states. And fortunately, we're in a state that said, okay, we'll make our own rules. Then the NCAA said, well, we didn't mean that much. And then we go back and forth. And so we change as we go.
Is the number for football going to be, I think, around 85% of that $22-ish million?
That's my understanding, yeah.
So probably a lot of the NIL space will be working around those other sports. I felt like that's kind of what you were saying, reading between the lines, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Certainly could be, and without parsing all that out is tough because I think each school is individual. Each school is unique, but I will say that the role of the external collective or the collective, it doesn't have to be external anymore, right? Yeah. But the role of the collectively raised dollars will be to buttress that revenue share.
One other thing, I had another one come to mind as we're doing this. Baseball is like the one sport where you've actually got an outside monetary threat. Do you see whether, and particularly at Vanderbilt, could this get to a point where, a kid gets a seven-figure offer to jump to the pros and go early, and Vanderbilt can be in a space to be competitive financially and say, hey, look, the White Sox are offering you $1 million. We're going to get close enough in the ballpark to that we can make it worth your while to come here and then make it again on the back end.
Absolutely. In fact, I think you'll see situations where you'll have a player going into the draft and let's say if he goes first or second round, it may be just such that he's going to go anyway. But if he's third, fourth, or fifth round, then we can make a strong case, make a strong offer, as the saying goes. And that's not necessarily unique to baseball. In soccer, well, men's soccer, in other schools, that's been the case where schools have lost kids, go play in Europe or what have you. And there's something that's could be a real thing is golf. Right now, things have changed where players can benefit from certain things tournament-wise, but you might have a golfer with a similar opportunity. If you had someone that was otherwise going to be the high amateur at the U.S. Open or something like, or the Masters, and it'd be tough to turn down that big payday. But now it cuts both ways because of NIL. The player can benefit from that, so you can be creative for it. You'll have players that are still in college with large sponsorship deals they can benefit from. So it's kind of a two-sided sword there.
Well, and I've always thought in baseball in particular, like let's say, okay, you're getting $1 million out of school to go play for whoever. All right, well, we can match that. Oh, by the way, in addition, you get your education paid for, and you're not riding buses to Montana at 3 a.m. I always thought like once you can make the dollars not a factor anymore, then all of a sudden the leverage really tilts in the favor of a Vanderbilt in that case.
No question. And a Vanderbilt with the DNA that our program has, right?
Yeah.
To your point, it's another year in Nashville versus a year in Port Charlotte or Helena or Butte or what have you. That goes a long way, right? Nothing against any of those beautiful cities.
All right, Billy, I didn't mean to crowd you out here. I just had a few that came to mind. Anything that you want to get in before we grab the mailbag here?
No, let's hop into the mailbag.
Okay, the mailbag is presented by Sutherland & Belk, our longest-running sponsor. It is a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call, 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Also sponsored by John Levin, good friend of the show, Wobble Bond Dickinson. Thanks to student athletes at Vanderbilt University for their dedication, effort, and hard work. Guest line also presented by the Yeaman Packaging Systems Company, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation. We'll start with Wes Nashdor. He says, how much money does Vanderbilt need for each sport to compete for SEC championships? We'll just start you off with an easy one there, right?
There you go. That's right. Well, we can look at our peers. Well, people always ask, well, how much information do we share? Now, I always say, well, with where we are, I'm always reserved and conservative in how much I share. But when we're talking about our peers, we can throw that out there all we want. I mentioned some other schools. You talk about some of our aspirational peers here in the SEC. We got football teams spending $18 million. We're comfortable with, if we're at 2/3 of that, we're in pretty good shape. There's other basketball programs, I would say, at our level or slightly above, that spend between $5 and $8 million. We'd be happy being at that level. And there's a baseball program that's not on the level of Vanderbilt, but they spend between $2 and $4 million, and that would be right in the wheelhouse where we want to be, maybe on the upper end of that. I mentioned some of the non-revenue sports. There's some of those we can do with we can make real progress with something like 50,000. I'll give you another good example. We mentioned SMU a bunch. Their volleyball team is top 10 in the country. Their monetary war chest for NIL is the same as Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt volleyball hasn't played a game. Their NIL, we did a team-wide deal with the Predators, which is an in-kind kind of thing. In other words, each of the student athletes promotes the Predators. The Predators give us swag and access, things like that. Now, first year, those kinds of things work, but you want to ramp up $30, $50, $100,000, or as much as you can. I'm happy to report that our women's basketball is top level. When I say that, it's not 5 figures, it's not 6 figures. It's so the more we get in the war chest, the better off we can be, and that's where we believe we're headed.
Next one, Theodore 8. How big is the Anchor Impact staff?
So it's always in flux. I'd say it's fewer than 10. That could be fewer than 5. Now, I should say, if we were at a different school, different situation, we'd need to go out and hire a full-time fundraiser. Fortunately, we're able to collaborate with NCC, and they've got great fundraisers, and so we bifurcate a lot of that. Some of the fractional staff I've used before, brought along, and so we get those kinds of things. But we're pretty lean, because we want to be able to say, when we talk to people, well, how much what I give goes to the student athletes? We want to be able to say 100%, as close as possible, and ultimately it's 94 to 95, if not higher.
NBA Door, how is NIL being set up for repeat success and avoiding donor fatigue? I think the latter one is the place where I think your job is really hard, especially, if you load up, you think you're going to the playoffs, all of a sudden you get upset by somebody, that dream collapses. That is the thing that I hear over and over as a concern.
Yeah. And you look at, I don't want to pick on anybody, but you look at Florida State. Mm-hmm. They enter the season, they start have the season they have, then you see on Twitter people saying, we should ask for refunds for NIL and stuff like that. So you always want to preface it by saying, well, it can't be paid for play. But at the same time, I remember jokingly, we had an all-conference kicker once, and I think he missed a kick, and someone said, well, you ought to tell him, son, we don't pay you to miss kicks. But we pay them to magnify their brand and things like that. Donor fatigue is important, and you can't have too many donors. Some of the approaches we take is, you stay in active communication with them, and we always tell everyone, tell a friend, tell people who you know. One of the things we're working on is building the membership base. You can be a member, and we're relaunching the website. But the website we had, it wasn't it wasn't up to my standards, and so now you can get in there for $10 a month, but it's going to be you can become a member at $18.73 a month. We can't have too many members, right? So you get in front of people that you don't already know, tell them a story that's worth telling, and keep them going. But yeah, we need to expand our coalition of the willing, if you will, our coalition of champions, and talk to people that want to win, because ultimately that's what it's about, right? If we want to win, that's what we're doing. And going back to what I said before, with everyone I come across, what's NIL? Well, it stands for not into losing, which means if you're into winning, then you're into NIL. But if you're not into losing, then you're in NIL. The converse is also true. If you're not into NIL, then you're probably not into winning. And it's a fan base, an alumni base, a city of winners, and because of that, we expect that folks will hitch their wagon and keep it rolling.
JC32VU, in what ways does Vandy's NIL process have to differ from other public SEC schools that have large fan bases? Are there NIL areas where Vandy has advantages over those other schools?
Well, the number one advantage always of being a private school is things are confidential, right? I'll say another place we have an advantage is we have a chancellor that, that's someone in the, I'm reasonably certain he's not from the South, but in the South, there's a saying that says, you want someone, you don't have to tell them to go, you have to tell them to whoa. And that's how our chancellor is. You talk about buying things in Manhattan, buying things in West Palm Beach, and buying stuff down here on West End just the other day. We're expanding and we're going to win. And you addressed the football team and basketball team the same day the other day. You talked about dare to grow. Be concerned. Don't be concerned with what if it doesn't pan out. Be concerned with where we're going. And so at Vanderbilt, those are advantages we have. Now, there's always strength in numbers. We probably don't have the T-shirt fan base, but I think we're building it and we're getting it. And again, I think we need to spread the word that, look, Vanderbilt, in some regards, its greatest asset is its biggest challenge. If you mention the Vanderbilt to someone, what do they think? Oh man, you guys got a lot of money down there in the West End of Nashville. You got plenty of money. Well, that's never the case, right? And so that such being the situation, we need to continue to spread our words, spread the vision, and talk about what it takes to win it, which is everyone. And we want everyone. We want all the T-shirt fans to climb aboard and follow us.
JDL Cav at Vanderbilt, is NIL pledged to a player when he comes, or is it paid? If it's paid, is it paid in a lump sum or over time?
I should say that we follow NCAA guidelines, and we make sure we don't entice people make it a contingent on where they attend school. I'll also say that we make it clear that what's available here is typically what I would call commensurate with the market rate, and just like any compensation for an individual, we don't load it all up at once, either in the beginning or at the end. And I think the student athletes appreciate that too, because when you get paid, I think once upon a time I had a job where you got paid once a month. And way back then, it's like, man, most jobs you get paid bi-weekly. I can't imagine what it would be like if you got paid once or twice a year. And so we certainly don't put our student athletes in that situation.
JDL Cav again, in what sport does Vanderbilt NIL have the biggest impact at Vanderbilt?
Well, I would say, we have a legacy of success in baseball, right? And so that was there. We needed to make sure that we're level and have a presence such that we can sustain the success that we have. Now, when we talk of moving the needle from where we were to where we need to go, I'd say that's football and men's and women's basketball.
VA 72, are you developing a more permanent way to ensure future cash flow for NIL, such as an endowment or something like that? Do you have programs in which local and online stores sell NIL merchandise to add to cash flow?
So I love that question. And so as far as endowments, there's another school that's been mentioned in our podcast right now that's exactly their goal. And we've got also several efforts underway to identify and put in place passive revenue streams, and there's calls taking place to put those in there. And as far as local stores, merch, and things like that, I mentioned Starkville. There's a store, boutique, retailer, call it what you want, down there. I don't want to give them free advertising time, but every item in there is NIL related. So you buy something there and a percentage goes to NIL. I would love to do that here. And my wife, the the retail merchandiser would love to do that here, but short answer to that question, no, we don't have that right now, other than online.
Retail space a little more expensive here maybe than it is in Mississippi.
I'm going to go out on a limb and agree with you. I think you're probably right.
Yeah. I've got two more that I'll turn over to Billy. NBA door, how much is construction being impacted by the NIL fund conversations? I don't know if he said conversions. I don't know if he meant conversations or not. But anyway, address that however you will.
Well, if it is construction, you can look at Florida, Ole Miss, some other places that they've tapped the brakes on their construction projects because they wanted to go all in on NIL. Looking out my window here, I can confirm that there's some construction that's underway right now. Everyone sees it every Saturday. And Vanderbilt was in a unique position, right? We're so landlocked and our facilities needed upgraded. But I'm certain that moving forward, when you consider where it is and what you need to do and where money needs to go, you take that in consideration. Now, I will say this, though. People always say, what can I help? What can I do? Where can I take money away from? Should I not give to this, not give to that? And again, going back to that winner in the beginning, when people come up to me, one of the first things they say is, what can I do to help? And I always say that, well, there's three things. There's three pillars of success, the Holy Trinity, call it whatever you want. Number one, come to games, be a season ticket holder. That makes you an NCC member, right? Number two, give to Vandy United. That's the facilities. That's fine. Number three, and that's what I'm responsible for, give to NIL, because at the end of the day, you got to win games. To win games, you got to have NIL. Now, how you divide that up, that's not up to me. But if your priority is winning, then I represent, then that's where it needs to go.
Yeah.
Well, we got a good one.
The question was conversions. I asked the questioner to clarify he did. So, Billy, I'll let you get in a couple. Then I've got a couple more that have appeared on the board since we started. But let me let you get a word in here.
Okay. Well, there is one here from Knox Door on the board that I like. How do you envision the student athlete compensation funding process after these initial years of chaos to settle down? I'm sure you would agree this is chaos right now. But after that settles down, when the dust settles, do you expect it to look much different, if at all, than it does right now?
I do. I suspect at some point there'll be some degree of collective bargaining, which would probably make it easier. You can enter into a contract. You can put expectations out there. And when there's collective bargaining, that means there's people that are identified as employees. Sometimes it's union involved. Sometimes it's not. But there's public universities where essentially the work study students are unionized, right? So they have rules and things like that. So I think if we were to write down a list how we envision it, we can be assured that that's not how it's going to be. But I think there's certainly could be some kind of collective bargaining, some kind of employee or hybrid employee kind of thing. But the first step that needs to happen is get into the revenue share and find out how that's going to pan out.
Paul, I'm not sure if you were watching the Vanderbilt Alabama game. If you weren't to start, you were watching it in the fourth quarter, I would guess. But what did that win do for Vanderbilt football, but also the entirety of the school, but also NIL? Because you weren't technically here yet, but I'm sure you were in conversation, keeping up with everybody over here. What did that win do for Vanderbilt? How does Vanderbilt use that to leverage, and how do you guys use that to leverage?
The number one thing it did is showed what we're capable of, not only on the field, but I'll give you an idea. I'll tell you exactly where I was. I was at Del Frisco's in Fort Worth having dinner with my wife and another college football coach who was off that weekend. We're in the upstairs dining room, and I'm getting pictures of the goalposts going down Broadway. And then I excused myself from dinner, went and stood in a corner, and we were talking about getting email campaigns up. Having conversations about how the auction was going to take place, how it was going to get rolled out. From that point forward, I don't know what time of day that was, pretty late into the night. Between then and Sunday morning, we had an auction campaign live. We had an email campaign live. We had everything rolling out. As you all saw, we raised well north of mid six figures between campaigns, auctions, things like that. So it showed what we're capable on the field, and also showed what Vanderbilt staff across the board is getting capable of. Someone had to cut those goalposts, and Mark Carter and his team engaged people on campus to do that, and those items were delivered, and if that's the baseline, then who knows where we go from there. But yeah, great example. That's a good anchor point. You see what I did there?
I like it.
The last one I see in the mailbag here is from Anchor Enthusiasts. How's the compensation structure work for NIL? Are most student athletes, if eligible, signed into multi-year contracts? Is it year to year, or does it depend on an agreement with the player?
It's largely year to year. We've talked about some multi-year those are really isolated, unique situations, but it's largely year to year. At my old place, we would do at both my old place, we would do 2 agreements a year. For instance, football would go from January through June and August through November. Basketball would be a little bit different, but we would base it around the portal and things like that.
Billy, I think I'm done with questions. I don't know if you've got any more. I did want to end with just kind of an open-ended question to Paul, if there's anything that he thinks is worth noting that we didn't get into, but I'll give you the last word here before we get there.
Yeah. I guess the last thing from me, Paul, would be, you mentioned Vanderbilt and how, there's a West Palm Beach location. There's, you got Manhattan. I mean, Vanderbilt feels like it's everywhere. You just got to bring it out, got to bring that out of people, and Vanderbilt fans and Vanderbilt alums are everywhere. Or are there plans to, obviously there's plans to travel, I'm sure you're doing a ton of traveling, but how can that be a benefit to you guys? Whereas maybe some other SEC schools are sort of locked into their towns and their, 10, 15 mile radius in their state. And how can you guys use that as an advantage?
Well, that's a great point. I'll give you the example. I think you mentioned the Grove Collective. That was named after the Grove, the tailgate scene there. The tailgate scene in Dallas is called the Boulevard, which is modeled after that. The president there came from Old Miss. So Saturdays, when Vanderbilt has a bye or what have you, I'm on the Boulevard there. And one thing that's interesting is that in my circle, if folks aren't SMU alums, they're probably Vanderbilt alums. And everybody that I run across knows people from over there. There's families in Dallas, families in Houston, Charlotte. The department went out to LA a few weeks ago. So yeah, it is a unique, diverse, widespread fan base, and you got to go where the people are and engage them. And it really is Vanderbilt Nation, Commodore Nation. You see some schools, they'll say, all right, such and such nation. And it's really, 12 square miles comprises that nation. Vanderbilt is coast to coast. And so that is something that we absolutely have to leverage. And that's why I'll add, now maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Part of my job is to be accessible and to be at everyone's service. And so when people want to reach out, if someone's a contributor to NIL, they want information, then my job is to be responsive, make sure they have my contact information, get with them, because they're going to lead us to the next person, to the next person, to the next person.
Paul, you mentioned SMU there. You've touched on them a few times. I think that situation is fascinating, and I'm sure there are parallels, object lessons, whatever you want to say here, that can be applied to Vanderbilt. But that's a school that really, since the death penalty was handed out late 80s, early 90s, wherever that was, SMU has not been relevant in football for any lengthy period of time. And yet that's a team that is on the doorstep of the playoff potentially. I mean, I think SMU controls its destiny, could win, the Big 12, get into the playoff. And you look at the computer numbers, and they are right there. It apparently is not a fluke. How much do you take from that situation and apply it to this one, whether that be when you talk to donors and say, hey, look what they did, we can do that over here, or any other form that might take?
Well, and I would say we're on a bigger stage, right? They're in the ACC, and the thing that really galvanized things over there was a gentleman by the name of David Miller. He's on the Mount Rushmore over there, and he famously made a quote. Everyone, there's 2 sentences or two things that are talked about. One of them is the first one is they forewent their tier 1 media rights to go to the ACC. That's number 1. Number 2 was the response, which was more popular, which is Mr. Miller saying, well, you know what? it's a couple $100 million. I'm not going to lose sleep over a couple $100 million. So I say that to say, once we can identify the person at Vanderbilt who's not going to lose sleep over a couple $100 million, then we're going to be in good shape. But absolutely, that just shows where we are, because what we've got going for us is there's NIL. Vanderbilt's got it. We're serious about NIL, and we're in the SEC. It's unparalleled, and so whatever they're accomplishing over there, I would submit we can do the same and more. And I'll also add that I was at a lunch in Dallas with a Vanderbilt supporter, and I brought a kindred spirit SMU guy, and he was one of the folks around in the 80s and all those kinds of things. And SMU friend asked the Vanderbilt friend, well, let me ask you this, are you guys serious about winning? And I think we're showing that we are.
Well, and I think you just kind of answered the question I asked next. But, like, if they make the playoff, how much easier does that make your conversation around Vanderbilt football?
Oh, my goodness. It's something else. We consider everything else that's going on around here, who we are, where we are, and what we've got. I think it's a no-brainer.
Chris, I think the next step is an SMU Vandy rivalry.
Right.
I mean, we got to get that started. How fun would that be?
They had basketball games for a little bit, and SMU doesn't have baseball for reasons I don't understand. But anyway.
Well, they're supposed to play this year, right? And
yep.
I'll leave that conversation alone. That became Georgia State and so on and so forth.
Oh, right. That's right. I'd forgotten that. Yeah. Somebody saw the writing on the wall, perhaps. But anyway. Paul, thank you for joining us. Anything on the way out, I'll just give you the floor for any information you want to put out there, any topics that were worth discussing that we didn't get to, whatever you'd like here.
I think the number one thing is this. You don't have to be a six-figure donor to make a difference. You don't have to be a seven-figure donor to make a difference. My email is paul@vandynil.com. If you're listening to this, I hope you become a part of Anchor Impact. You can become a member right now for $10 a month. It's going to be $18.73 a month pretty soon. But at any level, we want you to be a part of it. Reach out to me, hit me up. You'll get access. I'll be responsive. I would love nothing more than for my email to blow up. And the other thing I'd ask is this. I'm a big pop culture guy. If you guys have seen the movie Ferris Bueller, at the end of the movie, yes. Towards the end, Charlie Sheen's sitting next to the sister, and she's talking about what a bad day she had. And Charlie Sheen says to her, you know what, there's someone you should talk to. And she says, if you say Ferris Bueller, well, you know what, I got to be that guy. So if someone says, man, I'm a big Vanderbilt fan, there's someone you should talk to. Hit up Paul@vandynil.com, anchorimpact.com, because we need everybody. And so climb aboard and let's go.
Just don't crash the Ferrari.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
That is my absolute favorite movie of all time. So anytime you make a Ferris Bueller reference, it's going to go well here.
Outstanding.
Paul, thank you so much for your time today. I've got to skip to another show here in a couple of minutes, but really appreciate you hopping on and joining. And by the way, on very short notice, I contacted Paul, I guess, late Tuesday night. I had a response within 5 minutes, and here we are this morning. So thank you for helping us make that happen.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.
All right. We thank all of our sponsors that make this possible. You can check out our content this week at Vandy Sports. We got all kinds of things going on there. Anyway, for Billy Derrick, I'm Chris Lee. You've been watching and listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast.